Good afternoon, Rick. How are you?
What's up, brother?
All is well, sir. How are you doing?
I am well. Let me turn my camera on.
Oh, it just keeps getting better. And there
There
you
you
are.
go.
How you doing? Hey, looking
I,
good, man. Looking
I'm
good.
good, brother. How are you?
Yes. Yeah. So sorry for the cock up in the timing.
Not a problem. Not a problem. Let me turn up my volume a little bit.
No worries. No worries.
Good stuff.
Indeed. Indeed. Wow, it's been a few years since we last had a conversation.
It has been quite a bit of time. Not
Uh,
much going on though, right?
no, no,
Everything's
no, no.
been
Just just a little,
just the
shenanigan here
world
and there.
spun off its axis, but other than that,
Just a little bit, just a little bit. I never saw that coming.
crazy times. Well, it's still morning here in America, so the day may bring yet unexpected surprises. Who knows?
Well, I mean, after this weekend, I mean, it's just been one hell of a storm. Needless to say, kind of nailed it for your future president, really, to be fair.
So yeah, I'm wondering how how people around the world, people in the UK and Europe are thinking about what's happening here.
Well, I can tell you from my perspective that as soon as I saw the footage and heard about what had happened, I was like, that's it, cut and dried. He's your guy. That he's going to be your guy because everybody loves a survivor, everybody loves a hero, and that kind of fist of defiance in the face of it all. That
You
would
could
that
not have gotten a better photo op than that, right? I
My
mean, that
God.
was it was a sort of a combination of no offense, George Washington, crossing the Delaware,
Yep. Yep.
and the Marines at Iwo Jima raising the
Yes.
flag,
That
so it was, yeah, wow.
I
So yeah,
I couldn't believe just how it was very synchronicitous, it just all everything that him turning his head at a certain point, otherwise it would have been a kill shot.
right,
Then
crazy.
then the fist, and
Yes.
I was just like, that's it. That's it. It's game over. That's that. Bye bye DNC. Bye bye. We'll see you later. Go over to the minibar.
That he had the wherewithal to raise that fist at that moment, to actually stop them, stop, and do that.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's going to be tough to beat, and I think he may have converted some in that one.
definitely, definitely. And I think even Bill Mayer said it on. We got the report on the Monday. What Bill Mayer had said, and he said we are now the violent side. I couldn't believe
Yeah,
it. I was like,
yeah.
it's
Well,
it's so true. Liberals have always been known to be peace and love and let's talk about this, and now sniper rifles and purple hair.
yeah,
It's
yeah. Well, they're certainly here. The one side of the partisan divide is making a lot of hay with the idea that he is a registered Republican, not
yeah,
a
yeah.
registered Democrat. So, notwithstanding that he gave a small amount of money to progressive causes, so this will continue. There's still a long way to
Hmm.
November, and a
Yep.
lot can happen, and we'll have to see how it plays out.
Indeed, indeed. Well, that's enough political rhetoric from my end of the water.
There you go. Okay,
Yeah.
from your side of the pond,
From my
right?
side, yeah, we've got our own thing going on. We've just installed a new government. They can get on with it. Thank you very much. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
but
we do here in the US where we do get some news from Europe, and we see some of the things that are going on there, and I'll be in Germany and France in the fall, so I'll get to see firsthand a little bit of what's going on. I was in the UK a couple of years ago in 2019, and look, we love you guys. I love London. I love a lot of the UK. The food has improved immeasurably. Uh, you know,
you can come back
um,
anytime. Thank you for that glowing endorsement.
I hope to. I hope to come back often and come and visit you, Max.
Yes, definitely. That's always been something that's been on the cards. It's like Rick and Max getting together, breaking bread. Definitely.
Would love it.
Yeah. So essentially, the reason why I reached out again, the 2.0 of our conversation is because some time has passed, and at that point we were kind of talking about everything that had been going on with regards to PEDs in relation to the fitness world.
Right.
Jeff Nowitzki had just joined the UFC and all
Mm,
of that,
yeah.
and coming off of the back of Bigger, Stronger, Faster as well, the documentary that you were
Hmm.
featured in.
Hmm.
And here we are, 2024, and I don't know whether you would agree with me or not, but it seems like there's been a bit of a tide turn in relation to how the general public are looking now at things like performance enhancers, testosterone replacement therapies. Um, and I was wondering what your take on that is and where you think potentially that has
Sure.
kind of come from.
So I guess just for the audience's edification on kind of the history of it,
Mhm.
the here in the U.S., our laws with respect to performance enhancing drugs are a little bit different than in the U.K. As I understand it, in the UK, the simple possession, personal use possession of a small amount of an anabolic steroid is not an arrestable offense. Nobody is going to be handcuffed and locked
Correct.
up and that. But here in the United States, it is. So back in 1990, we passed a law here federally that said that any amount of the possession or sale of an anabolic steroid as defined in the law, basically synthetic analogs of testosterone, is a federal offense. It's a category 3, schedule 3 controlled substance in the United States. Most Virtually every state has applicable similar laws that treat it either equally to federal law or even more harshly. In some states, the law actually makes the smallest amount of the possession of an anabolic steroid into a felony, a more serious crime than a misdemeanor. So I think, we've always had a much more draconian approach to the war on drugs here. And when steroids were put into that law, well, then the same kind of enforcement directives applied to steroids. We've got bigger problems here for sure. We've got a fentanyl epidemic and other problems that are
Yeah.
far more significant. And I do think that law enforcement priorities direct more toward those things, but still, testosterone and other anabolic steroids remain Schedule 3. So there are some restrictions here, even on prescribing, that may not, I'm not sure, but may not apply in the UK as much. And historically, doctors have been a little bit afraid of prescribing testosterone or other anabolic steroids because of the enforcement potential, because of the Schedule 3 status. They can only be prescribed here in the US for a legitimate medical purpose in the ordinary course of a medical practice. So, doctors who are worried that, well, is this prescription going to be viewed as more performance or cosmetic in effect than for medical, are sometimes worried about that. And as you know, and we've talked about before, the majority of people who are using steroids in the black market outside the medical context are not cheating athletes in any sport. They are recreational gym bros who are using steroids to look better in a tight t-shirt. That's really what it is.
Yep.
It's the hormonal equivalent of Botox and liposuction, right? And it's
100%.
where those things are legal for doctors to do, steroids are illegal for doctors to do for those cosmetic purposes. So we could spend a lot of time talking about whether that makes sense or not, but that's sort of the historical context.
And when
Over the
were
years, yeah.
sorry, sorry, I was going to say when were steroids actually DEA classified as Schedule 3?
So that was 1990. So we're
Wow,
talking almost, we're talking almost 35 years ago. It's
wow.
quite a long time. And the idea then was primarily to get them out of sports. The
Yeah.
primary reason for the criminalization of steroids was to protect high school athletes, college athletes, and to try to get it out of the Olympics and the National Football League, right?
Yeah.
Which I don't think it really. The law, we could talk about whether the law was effective or not, and I think there are a lot of very persuasive arguments that it's done very little and caused in other harms for whatever good it did. But over the years since then, there has been the growth of TRT, testosterone replacement therapy. That didn't really exist in 1990 in any form vaguely similar to what exists now. The
Mm.
idea that men of a certain age have declining testosterone levels and would benefit from the exogenous use of testosterone supplements didn't exist then to any real appreciable. That has changed tremendously, and so there's much more of an acceptance of that than ever before. Although Newton's third law is that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And so there's still you still see studies trying to demonize testosterone, trying to say that it causes problems. I just read one today. Many of them go against the overwhelming weight of the evidence, but it's almost like certain scientists and certain media outlets want to promote that idea that testosterone is bad. And testosterone to me is metaphorical for the sort of masculinity that's also somewhat under attack in certain circles in our modern time, right? So here in the U.S., the American Psychological Association in 2019 issued a statement that traditional masculinity is toxic to
Yeah.
boys and men,
Yeah.
right? So we've got this, I think that the push against testosterone and against traditional masculinity are two sides of the same coin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I find it quite interesting that testosterone is this really, really dirty word, but yet if you are on the how do we say it, on the side of the fence that is looking to mess around with gender, shall we say,
Right. Yes.
it seems like, oh great, yeah, pump them full of it, go on, yeah, have all a live long day, you can have take as much as you can within safe limits. But yeah, for, like you say, for doctors are now under increasing scrutiny in relation to prescribing it and making sure that it is legit, and it is an unfortunate place where we are, because at the end of the day, I'm getting up there now in years. I'm 45 years old, right? Okay, and there are things that that could definitely benefit. I mean, I've all of a sudden developed arthritic hips and so on and so forth, and
Right.
no squatting for Mr. Justice.
Oh no. Okay. All right.
So yeah,
Leg pressing.
leg pressing all a live long day, but yeah, the squat rack, no dice, no dice. But I make my point, that we know that testosterone helps the building of muscle. So that supportive tissue around my hip area would definitely benefit from a little support, So, but it begs the question though, Rick, and for those of you who are unaware of our previous conversation and are new to Mr. Rick Collins, you are a steroid defense lawyer. That's your staple. That's where your bread and butter is.
Yeah, so I come from sort of a dual background, right? I
Mm-hmm.
was a competitive bodybuilder before I went to law school, before I became a lawyer. So I have always been involved in the fitness community, the bodybuilding community. Ran a personal training business for a period of time. I have various certifications for training, and so I'm in that world of training and nutrition. On the legal end, as a professional end, I became a prosecutor, a criminal prosecutor here in the U.S. After law school, spent 5 years putting the bad guys in jail, so to speak. Then went into criminal defense, did bread and butter criminal defense for a period of time. I'm very familiar with all sorts of state and federal criminal defense. But the timing is everything, they say. And the year that I went into private practice was 1990, the
Wow.
same year that steroids were criminalized. And
Yeah.
so I was one of the few, if not the only lawyer of the time that really had a foot in both worlds, the gym community of people who were using steroids, as well as the legal community with the skills to be able to defend an accusation. And so I kind of became the go-to person for steroid defense through the years. It does make a very large percentage of my practice, not just steroids, but any drug that makes somebody bigger, stronger, faster, or that is not the traditional narcotics or drugs of abuse. So I've dealt with peptides and SARMs and growth hormone and 1,4-butane-diol, GHB, analogs, all sorts of different little more chemical, less traditional drugs are what I
Mhm.
do. And I've practiced throughout the United States. I think I estimated I've practiced in over 40 different federal courthouses throughout the United States. I've given lectures in other places around the world. I wrote a column for a bodybuilding magazine for many, many years.
Muscular
Muscular
development.
development.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Until the winds changed and print really became something of the past.
Yeah.
And now everything is digital and video. But so that's kind of where my practice is. I also represent a lot of folks in the nutritional supplement business. So I represent a lot of sports nutrition companies on a
Mhm.
variety of legal, regulatory, and legal issues that they run into. So for me, I was able to combine my vocation and my avocation into one melded career that, I'm just blessed and fortunate that that happened and I was able to do it. I love what I do. I love practicing law in the area that I do. I've gotten to meet people like yourself from all over the world. I've given lectures in Thailand and mainland China, outside the U.S. So in various places. So it's been a great run, and I've been very involved in being a voice for um, I think personal autonomy
Mhm.
and truth. I don't characterize myself as pro or con steroids or anything else because really context matters. And I think we forget that and we dumb it down. Something's either good or bad. And that's not the way life is. Certainly, steroids for a 16-year-old who's taking massive amounts of steroids to work out in his mother's basement unsupervised and buying it on the black market. We could all agree that's a terrible situation. But for somebody, for example, who has either the HIV virus and muscle wasting, steroids are godsend, the greatest thing since sliced bread. So, and other things are contextual, right? And
Mhm.
the obviously every drug has side effects, and you take a bottle of aspirin, you're not waking up in the morning, right?
Indeed.
But I think a lot of the dangers of steroids have been overly exaggerated in the media, which isn't to say that they don't have risks, and certainly the risks are largely tied to the dose. A glass of wine a night is probably not going to do you harm. Maybe the resveratrol and will actually give you a little benefit, right? Or
Yeah.
at least we can tell ourselves that.
Yeah. Yes.
Uh,
It's
but
doing
but
me fun. Fine. No problem.
right. But a gallon, 2 quarts of scotch a night is going to be very bad. And there are steroid users that tend to veer toward the extreme because, very often they're seeking sort of an extreme change in muscularity. And that's where really the dangers lie. Obviously, the unsupervised use of any drug is not a good idea. And I do think that steroids should be back in the hands of physicians and pharmacists rather than underground lab, steroid mills
Mm.
and dealers, internet dealers. So in that respect, I think I I would make some changes, certainly to the way that we enforce and have crafted our steroid laws in the United States.
It's an interesting thing that you speak of because we spoke about, alcohol, and we know, I mean, in the UK, they say, right, okay, well, here's what you can have before, you know, the law's going to feel your neck, and you can't drive a car if you've had this amount. But it seems that with regards to where we are now in 2024, safe usage still has not been defined. And do you think that that is because that they would need to actually admit maybe we got some things wrong if they were to say, oh, well, actually, this is safe usage?
Right. Yeah. Nobody ever wants to admit they were wrong, right? And I also think that the if you don't like something as a policymaker, your goal is to just demonize it or say it doesn't work. And if you look back even in the 1980s, when the evidence was mounting that athletes were using steroids to bulk up and be stronger in sports, and obviously steroids do help performance in some sports, not in other sports, but certainly in some. And there were studies that were effectively rigged to purport that steroids don't help in athletic performance. And I think that when you lie to the public, even with good intentions or plausibly good intentions, I don't want people to be using it in sports, so I'll say they don't work. The problem is that sort of lying backfires, and then
Yeah.
you lose all credibility. And then you have people who believe that steroids have no side effects and indiscriminate massive use. It's all nonsense that there were any dangers at all. And of course, that becomes a very dangerous thing to think.
Yeah, I mean, with that said, who would you mentioned that you do a lot of good speaking, and you've done speaking in Thailand and mainland China. Um, but when it comes to your clientele, are you defending your gym rat user, the guy who wants to look great in a t-shirt on the beach, or are you dealing with doctors who may have misprescribed, or supplemental companies where there's been a little bit too much of this and a little bit too much of that? Where who is your client? Who is your end
You've
client?
just described the universe.
Everything, all and above.
Eloquently described, Max, the universe of my practice. So all of the above.
Right.
Yes. Doctors who, you know, deviate from what, some regulatory or enforcement body thinks they should have done. Supplement companies that may go outside or claim to be going outside of either the claims or the ingredients that they should be using. I represent. There was a time, I think, where I had a larger body of clients for personal use possession cases.
Mhm.
And that's less common now. Now most of my clients are underground lab, steroid manufacturers, kitchen chemists, so to speak,
Right.
people who are importing the raw powders and making it in their homes. But I think that's largely because the greatest exposure very often to the possession of an anabolic steroid is in the acquisition, right? Once it's safely tucked away in a drawer in your bedroom,
Yeah.
there's limited ways that law enforcement will be able to detect it or know that it's there. But the acquisition is where the exposure is, right? And very often, years ago, maybe 20 years ago or 25 years ago, the acquisition was largely the importation of finished product from other countries,
Right.
maybe Europe or Asia, which would come through the international airports into the US, go through scanners, and would sometimes be detected. So somebody who orders, let's say, 1,000 tablets of an anabolic steroid from Thailand, and that was a popular thing to do. There would be 1,000 Anabol tablets, which was a methandrostenolone product that was
Mhm.
being made in Thailand for quite a period of time. And so they'd import either 500 or 1,000 for personal use. If that got flagged at the airport, it would be passed down sometimes to state law enforcement authorities who would look at 1,000 tablets and think of it as if it was 1,000 tablets of ecstasy. So
Right.
now there's this perception that this is a major dealer. So you'd see that guy arrested, and he would call me and say, "Listen, this is my cycles for the next number of months or years, and this isn't for any redistribution. I would need to sort of re-educate or educate the folks in the courts about that. Now you see very little finished product imported into the United States. It's all powders,
Precursors.
often labeled as creatine, labeled as something other
Yeah.
than a steroid. Once it gets here, then it's made here. So you really don't see the personal users arrested like I did
Mhm.
25 years ago.
Right, right. I mean, yeah, I mean, showing up with a, 5 gallon drum of pseudoephedrine at your doorstep, it's gonna alert some people.
Right, right.
I mean, um, but to we were talking about how the public perception of steroids back in the day was you're a cheater, you think Ben Johnson, you think Dwayne Chambers, the IOC commission, Sochi, you know, and now
Right.
we're like, where do you think, I mean, that tide seems to be turning in relation to the personal usage thing, that we're seeing these benefits? Do you feel that there was a point in time where the lights went on, or do you think that it's just that natural evolution, generational passing over in terms of, like, for example, Gary Wadler passing away, God bless him, God
Right.
rest his soul, but he was a staunch, no way, absolutely not, we are not doing, we're never going to test, we're never going to do anything in relation to kind of making this marketable or acceptable. But yet here
Right.
we are in 2024, and it's everywhere. We've got health clinics now saying we can give you TRT, we can give you
Right.
peptides, it's in a gum, it's in a balm, it's in this, it's in that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you mentioned the late Dr. Gary Wadler. I was just thinking of that, thinking of him the other day, and his statement to a journalist that, well, how do we know? He was asked, how do we know that steroids are unsafe? We really don't have the long-term tests to show whether they are or they're not. Was the question he was asked, and his response was, and we will never know, and essentially we'll make sure we never know, because it would be unethical to do the tests, the sort of long-term tests, to use people as guinea pigs to find out. So we will base our policies on the ignorance of never knowing the answers to those questions. And that view was shared by many at the time. I think you're right. I think as more and more men are seeking or being informed about testosterone replacement therapy, the stigma, the fear at least of testosterone is diminishing. And so when that happens, the next step is, well, wait a minute. If I can perform better myself as a 44-year-old, 54-year-old man, whatever, um, well, what's so bad about the concept of improving your performance if it's not hurting you? And obviously the Gary Wadlers and the Dick Pounds and those who were really integral to the infrastructure of the anti-doping movement would say that, well, there are risks to these drugs, some known, some unknown. Also, they would argue that there's a coercive effect for those who don't want to use, because if five guys on in the sport are using steroids and the other five choose not to, they may be at a disadvantage in a particular sport. And so they effectively are forced then to use those drugs in order to compete. And so that's an underlying basis for for the anti-doping movement's ideology. But there's a lot of arguments that on the one hand, it may not have been a very good system. Certainly, people like Lance Armstrong were able to beat the system for many years.
Mhm.
So the system is certainly not catching everyone. On the other hand, there are people who use a dietary supplement that happens to be contaminated with some banned substance that they don't even know about and that's not on the label. And the anti-doping infrastructure, which is sort of a strict liability code, says, well, it doesn't matter whether you knew or didn't know, unless you can really establish you had absolutely no fault, you're accountable for whatever is in your urine.
Yeah.
So sometimes you've got people who are not cheating knowingly, who are labeled cheaters, people who are cheating knowingly, and they are not getting caught. So there is a movement now to sort of bypass this whole system and say let's just throw out the entire doping and anti-doping infrastructure and simply let athletes use whatever they want in with personal liberty on and autonomy over their own bodies.
Well, that just brings us straight in.
I see where this was
You
going.
know where
Yeah,
this is going to go.
yeah, yep,
So
yep.
we now have word around the campfire, especially if you
Mm-hmm.
listen to Joe Rogan, the
Mm-hmm.
enhanced games
Right.
where it's all to play. Whatever your pick your poison, so to speak. Dare I say it? In the whatever you are not going to be, you're not going to be urine tested, blood tested, and you are free to compete. At what? How are they? What? What? What do you think that conjures up in terms of an ethical dilemma for an athlete who takes part in something like that, who would normally compete at Olympic level? Would they want to get involved in something like that?
Right. I mean, so when you have a proposal to dispense with these guardrails, you're going to have a number of different perspectives depending on who you speak to. So you've got certainly you've got folks who are enthusiasts and who will say, you know what, um, let's see what the human body is capable of. Isn't the essence of the spirit of sport to push the boundaries, to push the limits as far as they can go?
Yeah.
And we do that. Athletes can do all sorts of artificial things, high altitude training, hyperbaric chambers. There are all these things that are inequitable. So if I'm an athlete who lives in a relatively low-lying area and I don't have the means or resources to jump in a hyperbaric chamber or to train at high altitude or to follow the diet or supplement regimens that more funded athletes can do, there's always going to be inequities. There's inequities, just genetic inequities.
Yeah.
I may be the best basketball player that the NBA could ever imagine, but if I'm 5'2", it's not going to happen for me, right?
Oh,
I
I'm
mean,
the
that's the
epitome of genetic inequity. So
so life isn't fair, right?
yeah.
So this argument that, well, we're really going to keep things fair or level playing field. I'm not sure there is a level playing field ever. So there are those who would argue, let's see what's capable of being done. And there's also the argument that if some of these things, whatever, whether it's steroids or other new chemicals or drugs or supplements that may push the boundaries of performance, well, maybe some of these might have medical applications or applications for the average guy to be able to use them and improve the way they feel. Maybe for a 75-year-old person to be able to walk without a cane. That sort of result might come from the exploration of pushing the human body at these more, athletic extreme levels. There may be trickle down applications for other people. So all of those things, and if we follow the Gary Wadler rule, we're never going to do any research about it to prevent it. Well, then you wouldn't be able to necessarily get these possibilities, right? Then there's, of course, a large segment of people you'll ask will say this is horrific, and that we're making guinea pigs out of athletes who will be driven to hurt themselves in their quest for winning that gold medal or award. And so this is a recipe for death and destruction. And you see that, and that's certainly I am sure that the World Anti-Doping Agency and the International Olympic Committee would fall in that camp, right?
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure they're running around with their hair on fire at the moment with the news of all of this that's going on.
Well, sure, because you would think, and their sponsors are worried that if this is allowed to take hold and is embraced by the public, well, that's potential sponsorship dollars, television watchers, interest of media that's being diverted from, the Olympic Games to these alternative games where, records could be broken, things may happen that transcend any prior human abilities. So that's certainly a concern for those companies. And there is potentially something to the idea that athletes will push as far as they can push, and at some point, how do you contain those risks? How do you prevent excessive risks? Should the person just be able to say, okay, it's my body and my choice, and I can go as far as I want with it? Or is there some potential accountability or even liability for an organization that encourages, enables that sort of thing to happen?
Well, this is the question, really, isn't it? Because from a litigious standpoint, are they going to be, well, we're going to need you to sign this disclaimer. I can't imagine a world where Mr. Rick Collins Esquire is not going to be brought into this conversation somewhere and be like, yeah, can you take a look at this? Is this going to be okay? I see it as it's a very complex. It sounds very simplistic. Oh, we're going to have a competition where the competitors are free to enhance as they see fit. Where I think about it is things like, okay, so let's say they break a world record, right? Does that then mean that we have the record books, the Guinness Book of Records that comes out every year has to be rewritten in parentheses, 100-meter sprint broken under? Do you know what I mean? It's seen
Sure.
as just a world record, right? There's so
Yes.
many of these little minor complexities that just for the idea of just having something that evens the playing field and says, look, you know what, you can do your thing, whatever it is. And how are you monitoring as well? Are you saying that if your blood level is a certain amount of testosterone, that
Right.
no, 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 no.
Right.
What are safe limits? And what about female competitors?
Right.
What are we saying in that regard? Is it a
Sure.
there's so much. It sounds like a great idea on paper, but then when you start to pick and you start to kind of like, does it then mean that that competitor is now null and void from ever competing for their country in the Olympics?
Right.
It's
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. There's certainly a lot there and a lot to kind of pick apart. It is interesting to think about to what extent does the infrastructure of the organization that's overseeing this get involved in the monitoring of the athletes, right? Because in a sense, the more monitoring that goes into it, ultimately perhaps the more liability of if something goes wrong, right? The more treatment and duty that's owed to the athlete by the oversight
Mhm.
organization, the more potentially they're on the hook if something goes wrong. On the other
Yeah.
hand, if they don't supervise at all, you know, you see a recipe for problems there as well. So, what are the criteria? What how high does the blood pressure go before you pull the plug on that athlete, right? I mean, or what about cholesterol changes? What
Yeah.
about? I mean, there's lots of things that would have to be looked at. So I think the argument would be that you know there would be limitations that would be put on that would not allow sort of the free for all,
Mhm.
because health factors would be monitored, and if they became, however you define the red zone, if once somebody goes into the red zone, they're not allowed. So essentially, the argument might be that it's in some ways similar to the restrictions that currently exist in the Olympics and other organized sports. You're just putting different limits from a different perspective instead of on the presence of the controlled substance or the banned substance in the urine. You're using health markers to determine who's allowed to compete and who's not allowed to compete. So you're still putting limitations on what might be the real record broken because you're not allowing the health markers. So it's an interesting philosophical question, right? Because you're still not allowing things to really go to the point where somebody could break all the records but at the same time jeopardize their health. So these are ideological questions that organization is going to have to explore and work on. Can it be done? I don't know. There's risk certainly to it, and you'll have institutions and administrations worldwide that will probably try to attack it and prevent it. And you know, um, do I like the current system? No. Am I intrigued by this idea? Sure. Um, you know, but I also have concerns about it.
Yeah. I mean, you just touched on it, worldwide, geographical, like where will you be able to hold something like this?
Right.
Like you said, from a federal standpoint, the USA's out of the question. It's not going to be held in the USA. Are we
Yeah.
looking at our Arab Arab Emirates states potentially that could hold this,
Right.
that can
I mean, yeah.
it it does beg the question, because at the end of, I mean, to be fair with you, I can't see the Arab Emirates, being too cool for school, because of the fact that they don't allow things like codeine into the country without medical prescriptions. So I think that there would need
Right.
to be, a very a very long sit down with whoever is going to say, yeah, we'll
Right.
hold it, we'll do it. But
Yeah, I think ultimately there may be a country that says, hey, this is an opportunity for a lot of money to come in,
Azerbaijan.
right? So yeah, it may be found. I think the devil's going to be in the details,
Yeah, definitely.
and I'm withholding judgment on it until I actually see all the specifics. Can it be done properly? Probably, or possibly at least. But the devil will really be in the details of how it's constructed, you know, how they ultimately work out this idea of monitoring, what the criteria are for it, etc.
And I think it's going to be very interesting in the we talked about sponsorship, and the sponsorship dollars and pounds that come. The two biggest sponsors of the Olympics, which I find completely and totally laughable, is Coca-Cola and McDonald's.
Right,
But yeah, we could have something here. You could have sponsored, but like Metrics, for example, sponsor the world's strongest man. So you
right.
would have, I think that there is space for that conversation to happen. And according to the gentlemen that have set this thing up, there are major, quote unquote, major sponsors who are interested,
Mhm.
whether that's hyperbole or whatever, in order to kind of drive interest, it remains to
Right.
be seen. But from the standpoint as a competitor, I mean, I think it's going to probably be the best display of human physique, endurance, and just like you said, it's going to be a prime example of what the human body can do. You can tune up a car. We're going to see tuned up humans. We're going to see exactly, what it is, and what countries are going to be involved as well, because we definitely know that there's a few countries out there that will remain nameless. China, that will, that do have a very interesting biological um experimentation system, shall we say,
Sure.
along with our Russian partners that we saw that happened in Sochi as well. And when you have countries that are where it's free for all, we can represent you and we can do it with no, there's no chains on us. I think I think we are going to. I just I would love it to happen. I really, really would, because I think it would. Everybody loves a winner. It goes back to what we were saying right at the very, very beginning. Everybody loves a hero and everybody
Right.
loves a winner. And so
Right.
seeing record after record after record just being smashed.
So I think it depends on the fan, what percentage of fans just want to see superhuman feats. I want to see something that transcends all records, just an amazing thing. There are those fans who feel that way, but there's also purists.
Mhm.
There are purists, particularly in American baseball. Purists are a large proportion who really look down upon the steroid era, and even though there's because you've got the past records that are so hallowed that when somebody breaks that past record of
Mm.
home runs or whatever, you've diminished the value of that person's record. And if you've broken the rules of the sport by some sort of performance enhancement, well, then it's evil. It's bad. And there are purists who see it that way, even though I'm not sure you're ever comparing apples to apples, because Babe Ruth was eating hot dogs, and I mean, we now have nutritional programs that now everybody's eating a high protein diet. We've got completely different training methodologies. People are now using boxers used to be afraid of lifting weights. It'll slow you down. Now we've got boxers training in gyms with resistance training. So
Mhm.
obviously we've evolved a lot, and I'm not sure that it's ever fair to compare the athlete record from 2024 to the athlete record of 1924.
100%. Yeah. It's when you speak of Babe Ruth and you see those grainy black and white, and you think to yourself, these guys were smoking in the dugout, they
Yes.
like you said, worst diet,
Right.
drinking,
Yep.
whereas now, we have probably, I would say, pick a sport. We have the greatest sports science now, heavily invested. What can we do to get you to the line? We don't want to cross the line, but what can we
Right.
do to get you to it? You know,
Sure. Yeah.
and this idea now with the enhanced games taking out, USADA, or who's the World Anti-Doping Agency in this
Mhm.
case,
Right.
WADA. We are now seeing other sports franchises like the UFC who are moving away from. They're not saying that they're not testing, but they're not
Right.
saying that they're not testing either. But I can't seem to remember if Nowitzki's still involved with the UFC, or if. But anyway, that's beside the point. But the idea that we're starting to kind of like, look, these are athletes. These are people who are in the prime. They know what they can do. They know what they need to do. And you spoke of the athlete who accidentally, takes a supplement and boom, tests hot. urine off the.
Sure.
It happened to Khalil Roundtree most recently in the UFC.
Sure.
He said,
And I've represented many athletes who were put in that position, and certainly there are athletes who make the claim that they took a contaminated supplement to cover up their own willful, intentional, use of performance drugs. I mean, let's face it, the dog ate my homework defense, so to speak.
it only goes
Uh,
so far.
so that happens, but the problem is that when we have skepticism to the extent that we don't believe anybody who says it, it's a problem. A few years ago, I represented an Australian boxer by the name of Sam Solomon, who was the middleweight boxing champion, and fought a German champion named Felix Sturm in Dusseldorf, Germany. In boxing, unlike with WADA controlled events or Olympic events, the parameters of the drug testing that's applicable is in the bout agreement itself. So the bout agreement contains the clauses, what will be tested for, what sort of testing is done, what the athletes can't take, etc. And so the bout agreement in this case basically said that you can't take any kind of stimulants, and that there will be testing for steroids and growth hormone,
Mm-hmm.
but nothing beyond that. So the fight went on. Sturm lost, Sam won, and then Sam tested positive for oxylifrine, which is methylphenephrine. It's a dietary ingredient that's used in some countries, but not others. And Sam tested hot for that, and basically the boxing commission, German boxing commission, said, well, okay, he's forfeited, he's lost, he's done. So that Felix Sturm won. So I was recruited to be part of the defense team for Sam. Found out that Sam had purchased that particular dietary supplement in a store in Australia, which Sam was well known in Australia. It would be like Mike Tyson walking into
Right.
an American, nutrition store. And he said, listen, I want something for some energy, but it can't have anything that would be banned in sport of any kind. They offered him a supplement. He had the manager of the store call the manufacturer of the product to make sure that there was nothing bad in it. And I had a record of that phone call. Wow. Being made from the store. So he really, from a due diligence,
he did everything he could do.
Everything you could. Certainly from a cheating aspect, this is not the guy who's cheating. This is the opposite of that. And so, so it wasn't the right thing to happen for him to be called a cheater, number one. And number two, while there was a clause that said no stimulants and methylphenephrine was a stimulant wasn't defined. What does that mean? Caffeine? Coffee? I mean, what are we really talking about? So it was so vague to me that it didn't even apply. The contract was, that part of the contract was nonsense. And as far as what was tested for, it specifically said steroids. It did not say stimulants. It did not say methylphenephrine. It did not say, any of these other things. And so what happens sometimes is the sample is simply sent to a WADA lab, which then does its full array of testing of, dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of different things. But that's not what the bout agreement said. The bout agreement said test for steroids. So my argument was he passed. He passed the bout agreement requirements. And so I ultimately demanded and was given a sample, the remaining sample of Sam's urine, which I took and sent directly to a lab here in the US and told that lab, here's the bout agreement. Here's the urine. You test this urine for what is dictated in this agreement. Whatever you think, however you interpret this agreement circumscribes the testing. They tested appropriately for steroids. There were none. And so they gave me a report saying that Sam was exonerated, that he passed. So I did a huge press release saying Sam Solomon exonerated from doping. The German Boxing Commission went crazy and said, you tested for the wrong things. I'm like, no, no, no. You tested for the wrong
Yeah.
things. I tested for exactly what should have been tested for. And ultimately, we resolved the case. Sam didn't was able to keep his purse, kept his ranking, went on to beat Felix Sturm in the rematch, and then went on to $1 million purse. And he actually flew me out for one of his fights, one of his last fights out in the Pacific Northwest, and I sat ringside for his fight. So, but that's an example of how, okay, for those who love the current doping, anti-doping infrastructure and how it works, I think most people would agree that didn't work. That
Mm,
that shouldn't have worked that
mm,
way. And there are other athletes who, particularly at the college level here in the United States, I've seen who inadvertently consumed supplements that contained some contaminant. It's less common now, I would say. There was a period of time here in the U.S. where prohormones, which were basically loopholed anabolic steroids, were being sold as dietary supplement
right.
ingredients, lawfully or unlawfully, and so sometimes there would be glitches in the proper cleaning of the equipment and
Yeah.
the machinery, and so you'd have cross contamination of supplements that weren't supposed to have that in it. And there have been a number of athletes, even at the higher level. If you remember, Kicker Wenzel was
Yes.
a an Olympic athlete who took a multivitamin and
Yep.
tested positive for steroids, and he lost
Yep.
his Olympic dreams as a result of that.
Yep.
So, so this is real. It's less common today, but it can still happen. And it just shows that the current system is not perfect, right? And so thinking outside the box to come up with some alternative way of dealing with fairness in sports is not necessarily a bad thing.
Uh, I I I I go back to at the very beginning of us and our discussion, and you were saying that you've got the privilege of being somebody who understands the sport of bodybuilding and also practicing law.
Yeah.
Has there ever been times throughout your career where you kind of thought, hang on a minute, I'm a little too close. This is, has there ever been any kind of like quandaries in relate, like you think, hang on a minute, this is maybe I need to take a step back here.
No, because most of what I do where that would conceivably happen is really in the context of criminal defense representation,
Mhm.
where you're an advocate for the client.
Right.
And so, you're not in a position where you're really ever ethically compromised. I suppose if I were a prosecutor
Mhm.
and I were prosecuting people for personal possession of anabolic steroids, I would feel somewhat conflicted about that because I have, just sort of as a person who's seen the way the criminal justice system here in America can really derail somebody's life. And
Mhm.
certainly there are people who need to be prosecuted and people who need to be in prison. And,
Totally.
contrary to some of the narratives here in the United States now, which is to deinstitutionalize and shut down the prisons and well, certainly there are problems with mass incarceration, and I believe that there are some people don't deserve to be in prison, and there may be alternatives to prison that are better for some people.
Mhm.
Nevertheless, there are some people who do belong in prison, and we
Absolutely.
need them to be in prison
Oh
for, in
yeah.
some cases, longer than they are. So, but I don't believe that the guy who's working in the body shop or the local grocery or as an accountant who's raising a family and doing all the right things and maybe makes the choice, however ill-advised it may be, to use anabolic steroids because of some personal insecurity, physical insecurity, a desire to look better, whatever it is. I don't think that person should necessarily be you know chewed up and driven through the mill of the criminal justice system. So I might have some issues there, certainly.
Mhm.
But I feel very good about what I do. Doesn't mean that I necessarily agree with all of my clients in what they are doing. Certainly, if you're trafficking anabolic steroids, which you've made in your basement under circumstances that may indicate a considerable lack of quality control,
Yeah.
and then selling them indiscriminately to people of all ages on social media. This is problematic behavior. This is, I think we would all agree with that. But as criminal defense lawyers, we don't always agree with what our clients have done. Otherwise, how could anybody ever represent somebody accused of rape or murder or anything else,
No
right? I
one's
mean,
getting paid.
that would make no sense, and the
Yeah.
system would break down because people need to have the evidence put to the test, and
Hmm.
some people who are accused of those things actually didn't do it. So we need the system to work like it does, and I'm just grateful that I'm able to help people in a unique way that I've yet to meet another lawyer who can do it in quite the same way that I do.
I'm, I'm blessed to know you. It's a fantastic ability that we have to be able to conversate over this. But where do you, as a final question, because I know you're on the clock, and
Thank you,
uh,
sir.
and my checkbook doesn't run that far. Um,
I'm not charging you a dime, Max. I'm not charging you.
God bless you. Thank you so
We're
much.
friends. We're buddies.
Indeed, indeed we are. But where do you see the future? I mean, like, we're here 2024. Last time we spoke was about 2015, 2016. So
Wow.
that's, yeah, yeah, yeah. Not that I'm counting. So
Wow.
that's in 8 years and we're here now.
Yes.
Where do you see the future? Where do you see this conversation going 10, 15 years down the line?
So I think a few things. I think we will see the beginning of a reduction in the stigmatization of testosterone, in part because of, as you said, the increasingly widespread use of testosterone for enhancement of men aging and having the symptoms related to aging, loss of muscle mass, loss of energy, loss of sex drive, all the things that are correlated with reducing testosterone levels. And as we know, after the age of 30, that it begins to decline. I mean, Mother Nature has sort of designed us so that after we've passed what Mother Nature thinks,
Mhm.
not necessarily correctly, is
No,
the child, bearing years. It's time to go gently into that good night, right? To sort of, as you
yeah.
get older and older, you get weaker, and yeah, it makes
Fall
it easier.
apart.
Yeah, fall apart, your teeth fall out, your hair falls out, and little by little, you climb into the grave
Oh, we
voluntarily.
still
So
look pretty though, Rick. We still look pretty.
we look pretty. Thank you, my friend. Uh, Back at you. So,
Thank you.
so, so I do think that we'll see that. I do think that the acceptance of testosterone in the gender space, for individuals who are seeking to transition from female to male, or from female to even a more masculine presentation
Mhm.
along the spectrum of presentation. Um, I think that as that becomes more accepted, we'll also see sort of a diminishing fear factor. We didn't mention it, but I think you're aware that a couple of years ago, just fairly recently, two U.S. senators actually wrote a letter to the Biden administration urging that the government declassify, deschedule testosterone from the Controlled Substances Act, really to sort of decriminalize
Mhm.
testosterone, or to at least lower it from Schedule 3 to Schedule 5 or lower,
Mhm.
because of the discriminatory treatment that it has on individuals seeking to transition. So we have sort of the two chemicals for transition: estrogen
Yep.
for people born male seeking to become female, and testosterone for people born female seeking to become male. One has no restrictions. It's a
Mhm.
prescription drug and can be fairly liberally prescribed for that purpose. The other is this controlled
No
substance
dice.
that has
Yeah.
all this red tape attached to it and supervision, and the DEA is watching So, the effect is discriminatory on the individuals. Why is one treated differently than the other from the patient perspective? And so the trans community actually lobbied those senators to approach the Biden administration to sort of bring this heat down and to take testosterone out. So I couldn't have imagined something like that 20 years ago
Mm.
or 30 years ago. So we're seeing these interesting developments in the area of testosterone. So I do think I see that continuing in some ways. And then, of course, the introduction of this idea of sports where testing would not be an impediment, and where use of performance enhancing substances of various kinds would be either tolerated or even encouraged, depending on how it all shakes out in the details. I think that the public will be exposed in all of these ways to this greater potential acceptance of it. And so it'll be interesting to see whether, we've had a cultural shift,
Mm.
certainly, toward a less masculine kind of norm to be accepted. And so where traditional masculinity is either vilified or at least condemned to some degree or mocked. And I think maybe as part of these developments, we may see kind of like a slight reversal of that, where where we recognize ultimately that traditional masculinity, with testosterone being the chemical metaphor for it,
Yeah.
is okay. It may not be the only way that men can express themselves, and there certainly should be different ways that we as men can express ourselves in the world. And by traditional masculinity, maybe it's tempered with the ability to show emotions and to not be stoic in every situation, etc. But we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater when we, as a psychological association, say that traditional masculinity is toxic. To me, that's insanity. And so, from a psychological organization, I
Yeah.
think they need a psychological examination.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation. So, but it seems to me that the future does have that the tide is turning, and that that with more conversations, more open dialogue, that it's no longer kept in the cupboard. It's no longer, oh, did you hear about what Rick's doing? The more we talk about it, and the more that we
Yes.
accept that this is, that there are benefits, there are medical benefits, and
Sure.
we can possibly get to somewhere where we understand, right? Okay, this is how far you can go with it before it's too much. So
I think I generally, if I'm a supporter or a proponent of anything, it is number one, truth. I think we have to allow for truthful conversation,
mm,
even if it's not agreeable to others. And so I'm against censorship. I'm against limiting, calling something misinformation, and then having it revealed later that it was in fact
yeah,
perfect,
legit.
valid
Mhm.
information is problematic. So I think truth over censorship. I also think generally, putting aside protected, children and other people who need maybe higher levels of protection,
Mhm.
um, I think personal autonomy should be valued, and that people should generally have the right to make up their own choices, even if they're bad choices. We do allow people to smoke. We allow people to drink to excess, not good choices. We allow people to eat in fast food restaurants 10 times a day until their
Oh yeah.
toes fall off from type 2 diabetes,
Yeah,
right? I mean, we
yeah.
allow all of these things under the idea that, hey, it's my own choice, it's
My
my
body, my
body.
choice, right?
Right. So if we're gonna, I think we have to be consistent with that
Mm,
across the board. And then
100%.
lastly, and maybe this is the way to end up, you know, I do think that having discussion, dialogue, exchanging the ideas, the people who are on one side of the fence on these issues, and the people who are on the other side of the fence on these and other issues, need to really open their minds, open their ears, be willing to listen to opposing viewpoints, be willing to hear what the other folks are talking about. Because if we continue as a society to silo ourselves in our, to live in our own little echo chambers and our own little bubbles of one side or the other, bad, bad stuff lies ahead.
And there it is, ladies and gentlemen. Keep talking. Rick, it's been an absolute pleasure. I know you've got to get off. I know you've got to go and do what it is that you do. And but thank you so much for taking the time and having a chat with me right here.
You're very welcome,
It's
Max.
been wonderful, and I
Yeah,
hope that we can do it again a lot quicker than 8 years.
I'm all for that. Absolutely. Great
Wonderful.
chatting, my brother.
Thank
Have
you
a
very
great
much,
day.
Rick. You too. Take care, sir.